Hello, everybody, and welcome to Responsible AI in Action with the Responsible AI Institute, where we speak with leading experts in the world of responsible AI. I am very excited to have Steve Mills from Boston Consulting Group joining us today. Steve, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have the opportunity to chat with you. It's been really incredible learning about your leadership in this space, all the incredible work that you've been doing. You work for our listeners out there as a managing director and partner at Boston Consulting Group, but you're also the chief AI ethics officer. So I'm wondering if you could share with us, what does a chief AI ethics officer do?
Yeah, sure. So as Chief AI Ethics Officer, there's sort of two sides of what I do. One is I oversee our own internal responsible AI program. So BCG builds a lot of AI on behalf of our clients. And so we have a comprehensive program in place to make sure that AI is, consistent with our values, consistent with laws and regulations, and is generally, minimizing risk and delivering value for clients. So I've got a whole team and program in place to do that. Then the other side of the coin is actually working with clients across industries to help them design and implement their own responsible AI programs, which obviously includes things like their policies and their principles, but also even like standing up red teaming and testing functions for Gen AI. So both kind of very broad at the organizational level, but also at times a touch more tactical, if you will. But again, all about empowering them to deliver value with AI, but ensure that it's consistent with their values and industry best practices and is not inadvertently doing harm to anybody. So it's sort of both sides of the coin.
Yeah, I'm sure especially recently, I'm sure, been plenty to keep you busy.
Yep.
Of course, as you know, the EU AI Act has passed today, or really has passed already, even at the time of this
Yeah.
recording. And it's the first ever legal framework on AI, which is, of course, with the aim of fostering trustworthy AI in Europe and beyond that as well. I'm wondering if you could share with us what you believe this means for businesses when it comes to implementing AI systems into their operations.
Yeah, so now that the AI Act has passed, companies will face increasing requirements around transparency, documentation testing, monitoring, record keeping, everything laid out in the Act. Meeting those requirements will only be possible with a holistic responsible AI program, that's integrated across the organization, across functions like the business, obviously, but also legal, risk, data protection, security. If you look at the requirements, it really cascades across all these existing functions, as well as has some very unique AI aspects. And so I think for business leaders, they need to be thinking about, how am I going to get compliant? What does that mean? What changes does that mean to existing functions? But also, what do I need that I don't have in place today? I think companies that already have a strong responsible AI program are well positioned, and it's a matter of sort of just making some changes around the margins, so to speak. Whereas companies that don't have a lot of work to do in a very short period of time.
And are you seeing that most companies are ahead of the curve? Are a lot of companies just trying to keep up with all of this information, whether it be regulation or innovation that's coming out?
I think most companies are behind the curve. And I'm basing that on some research we did with MIT Sloan Management Review. We've done surveys with them for several years around responsible AI maturity. In the latest, it was somewhere between 20 and 30% of companies had what we call leading responsible AI programs. So think about it as the most mature programs, the ones you would need in place to really be compliant, which means that you're talking 70 to 80% of companies have a lot of work to do to get to that level of maturity. Now, the challenge is what we saw is on average, it took companies 2 to 3 years to go from zero to a fully mature program. And now they're facing regulation that starts to go into effect in 6 months. And this is why I've been sort of beating this drum for the last few years that companies needed to start moving well ahead of the regulation being in place. So I do think, though, in fairness, that data is from basically a year ago. I think the last year has seen a lot of companies make moves in this space. The number of conversations I've had over the last 12 months, really since kind of Gen AI exploded, easily upwards of 200 companies that we've engaged on this topic in various ways. And so I do think companies are making moves, but I think there's also a lot of work left to do.
What do you think the ripple effect of the AI Act will be? I guess specifically as it relates to the United States and other countries. Do you find that organizations are really attuned to what's happening with the EU AI Act, even if they're not in the EU? Or is it
Mm.
more so like, oh, they're doing their own thing, the US or whatever country I'm in, we're going to do our own thing?
Yeah, it's a great question around the ripple effect. So on the awareness piece, I've generally found that global companies are sort of aware of what's happening, are tracking the AI Act. They might not know all the details, but they kind of are aware that this is happening. I have encountered a good number of companies in the US that don't have as big of a kind of EU presence that actually knew very little, if nothing about it. I mean, I'm sure people in the organization did, but I'm talking about the most senior executive levels. There was a surprising lack of knowledge of what was coming. So I think awareness is not great. In terms of the ripple effect, I mean, I do think the AI Act is going to influence how other regulators and other jurisdictions think about AI regulation. I mean, we're already seeing that. I think the fact that now that it passes, it will kind of accelerate that thinking to some extent. I do think too, and I alluded to this a second ago, but it's important to remember that the AI Act doesn't just apply to companies based in the EU. It applies to companies that are deploying AI or building AI in the EU, which means that the effects of it will be much more far-reaching across other jurisdictions in essence. So that alone will make other regulators pay attention. I think there's two ripple effects that I hope to see, both of which I see as being really good for business. One, I do think the fact that there will be regulations in place in the EU will force a degree of harmonization that hasn't happened yet among regulators. I think everyone's been talking about it and understanding that's important. The fact that now there is a law passed, even though there's some time before it goes into effect and there's some administrative steps, but I do think simply the fact that it's passed will bring people to the table in a way that maybe they hadn't been as much before. So that's one. The other, I'm hoping we see a big push towards standards for AI products. It's going to be critical to have standards that companies can rely on to demonstrate compliance. Because like the Act has a lot of requirements, but there's nothing in there that says, here's how you prove you're compliant with these requirements, or really what it means in terms of an implementation. And so having those standards from a body like ISO or others will become really important. And I think the fact that now that the Act is passed, there's a clock ticking to the point at which the companies have to meet these requirements, it will really put pressure on to get standards out there, which I just think are hugely important, not just for regulatory compliance, but as a means for organizations and businesses to know what does good look like.
Yeah, I'm encouraged to see that a lot of people and organizations are at least starting to become aware of what's happening and aware of the importance of putting responsible AI practices into place as their foundation. And we're really fortunate, Steve, to have leaders like yourself who are able to guide us into figuring out how to approach this. Because so many of us, so many organizations are trying to figure out the way, trying to figure out the
Yeah.
path. So I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to join us on the show today. And as I mentioned before, I just really appreciate the work that you're doing. It's so important, and I think will continue to become even more important as we progress. I'm wondering if you could share with our viewers where they could find out more information about you and all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, so first off, thank you for having me, and likewise, I hugely respect everything Responsible AI Institute's doing as well. I mean, that's first and foremost. You can go to bcg.com and find all of our thought leadership and information around the work we do in Responsible AI, as well as some pieces we've co-authored with the Responsible AI Institute on your website. So absolutely feel free to find information, reach out to me directly. Always happy to engage on this. I'm clearly passionate about it.
Awesome. Well, make sure to include those resources in our show description. So all of our viewers out there, all you have to do is scroll down, click those various links provided. Steve, thank you so much again for taking the time.
Oh, and thank you.